Leadership isn't about titles, it's not about hustle, and it's definitely not about fitting into somebody else's mould. Welcome to the Natural Leader podcast, where we break the old rules to build a new kind of leadership, one that's authentic, intuitive, and fully aligned with who you are. I'm Lindsay Hilliard, and in each episode we'll explore self-awareness, transformation, and the embodiment of natural leadership. If you're ready to lead from a place of ease, confidence, and purpose, let's get started. Hey, welcome back to the Natural Leader podcast. I'm Lindsay, and today we are going to talk about something that has shaped leadership for far too long, and that's force. For probably centuries now, leadership has been built on the idea of command and control, where leaders have power over others, instead of using their power to lift others up. Think about the traditional leadership models we've all been conditioned to accept. The idea that leaders must be in complete control, authority must be asserted through dominance, people follow because they fear the consequences, not because they're actually inspired. But force isn't leadership, it's control, and control is not the same as influence. So today, we're going to dive into why traditional standover leadership doesn't work, how force creates resistance instead of results, and what real leadership looks like when it's built on empowerment instead of control. And if you've ever worked under a leader who led through fear, micromanagement, or dominance, then this episode is definitely for you. And if you want to become the kind of leader who inspires instead of controls, then keep listening. For so long, leadership has been built around the idea of force. We've been told that leaders should take charge and dictate direction. A strong leader is the one who makes all the decisions. Power means control. The more you control, the more powerful you are. And honestly, this model may have worked in the past, but today it's definitely failing. We're seeing it in businesses, governments, and organisations everywhere. The top-down, do-as-I-say approach is breaking down because people don't want to be controlled. They want to be empowered. Think about it. When was the last time you felt inspired by a leader who ruled with an iron fist? Probably never. And so here's an example I want to share with you, which is about Steve Jobs and Apple, who I'm sure you're all very familiar with. So Steve Jobs is obviously widely recognised as a brilliant visionary. But in his early years at Apple, his leadership was heavily driven by force, control, and an uncompromising attitude. Now the problem was, Jobs was infamously demanding, harsh and dismissive of anyone who didn't meet his impossible standards. He micromanaged his teams, often belittling employees and rejecting ideas he didn't personally like. His my way or the highway approach created a culture of fear and burnout, which led to low morale. And he was so focused on pushing his vision through at all costs that he alienated his team and even Apple's board. By 1985, despite launching the revolutionary Macintosh, Apple was struggling financially. Jobs' dictatorial leadership style had created internal chaos. Many of the executives and employees found him impossible to work with. The board of directors, fed up with his control tactics and leadership failures, stripped him of his role, leading to the Macintosh division. And then feeling betrayed and powerless, Jobs actually resigned from Apple, the very company that he co-founded. Now, in 1997, Jobs returned to Apple, but he had completely transformed his leadership approach. Instead of forcing his vision onto others, he learned to trust, to delegate, and empower his team. He built a culture of innovation where people felt inspired and not controlled. And then as a result, Apple skyrocketed under his second tenure, launching the iMac, iPod, iPhone, and transforming into one of the most valuable companies in history. So the key takeaway I want you to take from that is that his first leadership style was built on force and it failed. It was only when he learned to lead through vision, collaboration, and empowerment that he became one of the history's most legendary leaders. And this also shows that you can totally learn from your mistakes and come back better than ever before. Now, if there's one place you'd expect command and control leadership to work, it's probably the military, right? But even in environments built on discipline, structure, and hierarchy, leaders who lead by force alone usually fail. Take the Vietnam War, for example. One of the biggest leadership failures in modern military history came from leaders who tried to control everything from the top without trusting their teams on the ground. High-ranking generals operating from the headquarters made battlefield decisions without understanding the actual conditions on the ground. They demanded strict obedience and ignored input from their soldiers and officers who had the real-time insights. And of course, the result from that, troops were forced into dangerous missions without context, decisions were made based on rigid strategies, not adaptability, and a loss of morale because soldiers felt unheard, undervalued, and disposable. Now compare this to modern military leadership, where the most effective leaders empower their teams, trust their intelligence, and make space for decentralized decision-making. In elite military units, so like the Navy SEALs or Special Forces, commanders give their teams a mission and objective, but they don't micromanage every move. Why not? Because they know that leaders in the field need to be able to assess situations and make decisions on the fly. Trust saves lives, micromanagement costs them. And the same applies in business, organisations, and leadership of any kind, really. The more control you try to exert, the more you slow things down and kill momentum. The more you empower others, the more they rise to the occasion. And that's why force-based leadership doesn't work, not even in environments built on structure and discipline. True leadership is about trust, adaptability, and creating the conditions for people to thrive and not just to obey. One of my favourite leadership experts is Simon Sinek. If you haven't read his books, Why Leaders Eat Last or Start With Why, I highly recommend you do. Plus he also has a bunch of YouTube videos too. He's just amazing. And Sinek ties leadership back to human biology and how trust is built in teams. And this is exactly why force-based leadership fails. He talks about how real leadership isn't about being the most powerful person in the room. It's about creating safety, trust, and belonging. And when leaders focus on control instead of trust, they destroy the very thing that makes a team strong. In his book, Why Leaders Eat Last, Sinek explains that great leadership is built into our evolutionary biology. So in early human tribes, leaders weren't just the strongest or the loudest. They were also the ones who protected the group, ensured its safety, and made decisions for the greater good. And our brains still respond to leadership in the same way today. There are 4 key chemicals that drive this human behaviour, and they play a huge role in leadership. The first 2 are endorphins and dopamine. These are what are referred to as the selfish chemicals. They're responsible for achievement, motivation, and reward. And then the second 2 are serotonin and oxytocin, and these are the leadership chemicals. They build trust, connection, and loyalty. Now here's where force-driven leadership gets it completely wrong. Force-based leaders rely on dopamine-fueled motivation. So do this, hit this target, or else. It creates a high-pressure, fear-based environment. It may work in the short term, but then over time it obviously burns people out. It focuses on individual performance instead of team success. Whereas good leaders, on the other hand, create serotonin and oxytocin-driven environments where they make people feel valued, safe, and trusted, and they create a culture of service, not of self-interest. And here's why the title of his book, Why Leaders Eat Last, comes in. Excuse me. Sinek tells a story about the US Marine Corps, one of the most disciplined, structured organizations in the world. And yet even in the military, the best leaders aren't the ones who demand authority. They're the ones who serve. In the Marines, there's an unspoken rule. Officers eat last. At mealtime, the highest ranking officers stand back and let their soldiers eat first. They take care of their team before taking care of themselves. And this isn't just about food, obviously. It's about how great leaders prioritize their people. They create an environment where the team feels safe, supported, and valued. Compare that to the force-driven leadership, micromanaging, hoarding power, making decisions for self-interest. That kind of leadership breaks trust, it isolates people, and it makes them feel like they're just tools in someone else's game. But the leaders who put their teams first, they create loyalty, they build cultures of trust, and they empower others instead of controlling them. So I want you to ask yourself this: are you eating first? Or are you leading in a way where your people know they come first? Because true leadership isn't about being served, it's about serving others. Now, another problem with force is the more you push, the more resistance you create. Micromanagement leads to resentment. Control leads to disengagement. Fear-based leadership kills creativity and trust. You create a bunch of lemmings, essentially. Force is also exhausting, not just for the people being led, but for the leader as well. And what always makes me laugh is that those leaders who exude force also hate being treated that way. No shit, hey? Leaders who rely on force are constantly proving themselves because they don't trust that their presence is enough, micromanaging because they believe nothing will work unless they control it, and feeling pressure because if they loosen control, they think things will fall apart. But real leadership isn't about power over others, it's about power with others. And that's the shift we need to make. So let me give you another example. Imagine this: a high-end restaurant in Melbourne with a reputation for excellence, the kind of place where every detail matters, from the way the napkins are folded to the exact placement of each dish on the plate. The restaurant's manager, let's call her Sarah, was obsessed with getting everything perfect. She'd worked her way up in the industry, and she believed that to maintain the restaurant standard, she had to be involved in everything. She watched over the chef's shoulders, correcting their plating, even when it was already perfect. She rewrote the service scripts, making them say exactly what she thought would impress her guests. She double-checked every reservation, constantly adjusting seating arrangements. And she even followed bartenders' drink measurements despite them being trained professionals. At first she told herself, this is leadership, I'm making sure everything is running smoothly. But what actually happened? Her team lost motivation. The chef stopped taking creative tasks, knowing she would override them. The servers stopped engaging naturally with their guests. They were too focused on repeating her script word for word and starting to sound like robots. She was exhausted because by trying to control everything, she was constantly overwhelmed, working 16-hour days, barely sleeping, carrying the weight of every decision. And one night, surprise, surprise, she hit the wall. During a packed dinner service, she completely froze. She was so overwhelmed that she couldn't make a single decision. But the restaurant carried on without her. The chefs cooked, the servers served, and the guests had no idea that she was standing in the back, unable to move. And that was the moment that she realised she wasn't leading, she was controlling. And control was sucking the life out of her and her team. So the next day she made a decision. She was going to trust her team. She let the chefs plate dishes their own way. She let the servers engage with the guests authentically. And she focused on guiding and empowering rather than micromanaging. And the restaurant? It didn't fall apart. It actually thrived. The chefs took more ownership and started experimenting with new dishes, earning more rave reviews than ever before. The servers felt confident and natural, which improved guest satisfaction. And Sarah found energy again because she wasn't carrying everything alone. Sarah thought that controlling everything meant maintaining excellence, but in reality, control was killing creativity, draining her energy, and crushing her team's morale. The moment she stepped back and started empowering others, that's when she became a true leader. So we've talked about how force creates resistance in leadership, but there's also another layer to this as well, and that's about forcing yourself. So how often do we try to force things into place? So forcing a decision before it feels right, pushing yourself to work harder when your body is begging for rest, trying to control every detail because you don't trust things to unfold naturally. We live in a culture that glorifies the grind, hustle, and just making things happen. And we've been conditioned to believe that if we're not constantly pushing forward, then we're falling behind. But what if that's the exact mindset that's keeping us stuck? So because when you force things, you block flow. Have you ever had a time when you're trying so hard to make something happen, like a job or a project or maybe even a relationship, only to feel like you were hitting wall after wall? And then when you finally let go of expectations and enforcing things, suddenly things started to fall into place. That's the power of flow. So true leadership is not about forcing yourself to be productive, successful, or in control at all. It's about knowing when to step back, when to trust the process, and when to allow things to unfold naturally. And when you shift from forcing to allowing, you create space for clarity because you stop pushing, you actually start seeing solutions. Alignment because you stop forcing yourself into roles or expectations and you open up the path that's truly right for you. And energy because you stop burning yourself out trying to make things happen. You actually have energy to lead and do the things you want to do more effectively. So if you've been pushing, grinding, or trying to force your way forward, I want you to ask yourself, where can I soften? Where can I step back? Where can I trust that things will come together without me gripping so tightly? Because just like leadership isn't about controlling others, it's also not about controlling every step of your own journey. So what does leadership look like when it's based on empowerment instead of control? Well, here's the difference, not just in how we lead others, but also in how we lead ourselves. So people who lead with force over others and themselves make every decision themselves because they don't trust anyone else or their own intuition. They demand compliance instead of inspiring commitment, even within themselves, forcing productivity, pushing past exhaustion. They focus on control instead of trust, micromanaging their team or their own path. They view leadership as authority, needing to prove their worth through action, instead of seeing leadership as a role of service and alignment. And they force outcomes, trying to make things happen on a rigid timeline instead of allowing flow. Whereas people who lead with empowerment over others and themselves give others and themselves the space to take ownership of their work, decisions, and growth. They create environments of trust and autonomy, knowing that real leadership is about support, not control. They see leadership as a shared responsibility, not something they have to carry alone or force themselves through. They understand that real power is shared, not hoarded, both in how they lead their teams and how they show up for themselves. And they know when to push forward and when to step back. So leading with intuition instead of relentless force. Empowered leadership isn't just how you treat others, it's also about how you treat yourself. So ask yourself this. Am I leading myself with trust, or am I micromanaging my own life? Am I forcing myself into control, or am I allowing space for growth, creativity, and flow? Because the way you lead yourself sets the tone for how you lead others. If you're constantly forcing, micromanaging, and controlling yourself, then it's only natural that you'll start leading others in the same way. But when you shift into empowerment, trust, and alignment with yourself, that's when you can truly lead with impact. So here are a few shifts to step into leadership that empowers instead of controls, both in how you lead others and how you lead yourself. So first up, stop leading from ego and start leading with trust. Many people fear that if they're not the one making every decision, they'll lose their authority. But real authority doesn't come from control, it comes from trust. And that trust isn't about others, it's about trusting yourself as well. If you don't trust yourself to pause, rest, or take time to make aligned decisions, you'll end up forcing your way through leadership instead of flowing with it. Trust works because it creates buy-in, it creates ownership and accountability. When people feel trusted, they step up, they take responsibility, and bring their best to the table. Not because they have to, but because they want to. And the same is true for you. When you trust yourself, you step into leadership with clarity, ease, and alignment. So here's an action step for today. Identify one area where you can delegate more and trust others to step up, or on a personal level where you can trust yourself to step back instead of forcing action. So the second shift is to create buy-in instead of demanding obedience. When people understand why they're doing something, they're naturally more engaged. Instead of saying, do this because I said so, say, here's why this matters. But what about when you're leading yourself? So instead of forcing yourself into productivity or hustling for the sake of it, ask yourself, why does this matter to me? Are you moving towards something that excites and energizes you? Or are you pushing yourself out of obligation and expectation? Buy-in fosters commitment, creativity, and problem solving. So when people, or yourself, see the bigger vision, they take ownership, they contribute new ideas, and feel personally invested in the outcome rather than just following orders. So in your next conversation or meeting, focus on the bigger vision instead of just instructions. And on a personal level, ask yourself, am I pushing forward with purpose or just forcing action for the sake of it? And the next key takeaway, encourage autonomy, not dependency. A great leader doesn't make themselves indispensable. They develop others so they can thrive independently. And the same is true for self-leadership. If you constantly push yourself to do everything, never taking a break, never allowing space, you create a dependency on pressure and force. I don't know how many times I've had to tell someone that you don't look good by taking the credit. You look good when you demonstrate how your team deserves the credit. And that's because you've empowered them to do amazing work. And the same applies to how you treat yourself. Real success isn't about how much you personally achieve, it's about how well you can create sustainable ways to keep it going. Autonomy builds confidence, loyalty, and long-term success. So when people are trusted to make decisions and own contributions, growth will happen naturally without pressure or force. So ask yourself, am I making decisions for people, or am I helping them develop the confidence to make their own? And on a personal level, am I constantly making myself responsible for everything? Where can I allow more flow and less force? And the last one is to shift from power over to power with. So as we talked about earlier, real power isn't about being the most important person in the room. It's about creating a space where everyone rises together, including you. When leadership is shared, collective success becomes greater than the individual achievement. Because when people feel valued, supported, and empowered, they bring their full potential to the table, lifting the entire team to new heights. And in self-leadership, real power isn't about pushing harder, it's about aligning with what actually works for you. It's about recognizing that stepping back, trusting the process, and creating space isn't weak. It's what allows true strength and resilience to emerge. So your final action step is to find a way to uplift someone else this week, whether it's mentoring, giving credit, or creating space for their voice to be heard. And for yourself, find one area where you can let go of control and allow things to unfold naturally. At the end of the day, leadership isn't about control, it's about empowerment. So here's my challenge to you for this week. Where are you leading with force? Where can you shift into empowerment? Because the strongest leaders aren't the ones who hold all the power, they're the ones who create space for others to rise. So if this episode has resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts. Please come say hi. You can come over to Instagram at freshcollective_IL. Let me know what's one shift you're making to lead with empowerment instead of control. And if you're ready to dive even deeper into natural aligned leadership, I've got something very exciting coming up, and that's the Natural Leader Hub, which is opening very soon. It's a space designed to support you in embodying leadership in a way that feels effortless and impactful. So if you're interested, make sure you check it out at my website, www.freshcollective.au, for all the details and to stay updated on the launch. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next episode when we're diving into trusting yourself as a leader by overcoming self-doubt. Until next time, be yourself, trust yourself, and show up as a leader you were born to be. See you soon. Until next time, be yourself, trust yourself, and show up as a leader you were born to be.